rock and roll for the last session of the day. So it says, I'm confused as well as you might be. On the sign out there it says 3 to 3:50. On the schedule it says 3 to 5. There's no way this is going to take 2 whole hours. Figures you might be okay with that at the end of the day. My brain's fried, so I can only imagine what yours are too. I've done this session in as little as 15 minutes and as long as an hour. So we can adapt it to what we're feeling we need to walk away here feeling like we can go implement this with students tomorrow. So there is a link up there, and really for the amount of people in here, I don't really need anyone to fill out the swag form. If you did, perfect. But I have more than enough for you guys to walk away with stuff for today. So Flipgrid today, send a bunch of stickers. You can have some stickers to walk out of here with. As well as the items that are on the right-hand side. If you do have an iPad, I've had that in the past where people are like, well, we only have iPads, how is this going to work on an iPad? Really, Canva and iMovie will accomplish the same thing that Flipgrid video will accomplish for you. So as we get going, my information's up here. Feel free to reach out to me at any point in the future if you need help with this or you just want to ask me some questions about it. My name's up there. I am from the Iowa City area. I teach it in the Iowa City School District. This is my first year not in the classroom. In the past, I've been a 5th grade teacher, and then I taught 1st grade for a while. I also taught 3rd grade. But now I am an instructional tech coach as well as the instructional technology coordinator, which I don't really know what that means yet. They're still trying to figure that out. It's a new position. So let's jump into why in the world I even started this. So I'm sure you had, I guess if I was to back up, one of the things I was trying to teach in 5th grade last year was writing, as I had taught many years before, but 5th graders are not super stoked about writing unless it's in the form of using their thumbs back and forth as fast as possible, or in the form of memes, or in the form of GIFs or GIFs, however you want to pronounce it. So what we were trying to do is we were trying to make writing a little bit more sexy with them in regards to let's try and create a digital space. So we tapped into Seesaw. So this is a result of an online classroom that was shared with another 5th grade teacher. So what we did is we created this online space. They can go, they can type on Seesaw, and what we did is we created folders based on certain categories. Maybe it was sports that they want to talk about, maybe it was movies, maybe it was food, maybe it was celebrities. They got to pick and choose what topic they would post into, and as you can see, we initially started writing text, but then at some point they started to request, like, hey, can we post a video? Sure, let's try that. But as you notice here, a lot of the posts went away from the text responses, and most of them started recording videos, which is fine. That's how they wanted to communicate. But the problem with that is, and we'll see if the internet will keep up, here's an example of what this ends up looking like. And here's a video response from these 2 girls.
Hi, I'm Addison, and I'm Delaney. Today we're going to be discussing our least favorite food, our least favorite fruit, and our least favorite vegetable. My least favorite food would have to be sushi with some type of fish. My least favorite food would have to be sushi or seafood. My least favorite fruit would have to be either blueberries or tomatoes. My fruit. Oh my gosh. Get it straight out of here. My least favorite fruit is.
Alright, we're not going to suffer through that entire 2 minutes and 43 seconds of it, but you kind of get the impression. And what's funny is if you watch the girl on your right, I am pretty sure she at one point really wants to strangle that girl because it gets worse and worse as they go through. So what's funny is I talked with the other 5th grade teacher. These 2 girls are not from my class, but I talked to the other 5th grade teacher, and the girl that's on the left acting like that, he said that she's not like that whatsoever in class. But since they got to go record kind of in a little collaborative space, this is the true character that came out. And that's what I saw throughout this entire project, is it exposes you to some of the passions of students, or maybe some of their unique kind of charm in a way that we're not usually used to seeing within the classroom. So that's kind of what instigated, let's try to do podcasts. We know that they want to hear themselves talk. They want others to listen to them talk, but the video piece can kind of be a distractor for them. So that's where the podcasting piece came in. And so with that being said, what we decided to try out was using this workflow. We have Chromebooks within my building, and we had purchased a ton of these microphones a long time ago that you plug into the USB port, but nobody used them. So we said, hey, we got all these microphones, let's try those. We could use the webcam or the built-in microphone, but the audio quality was not as great. We already had premium subscriptions to WeVideo at the time, And so you don't need the premium version of WeVideo to do this workflow, but what we had was access to it. So we said, let's use that. It's already something we have access to. And then Flipgrid at the time was still a paid product. We had the premium version at that point, but now it's free for everyone. So basically what's up there minus maybe the Chromebook cost, the microphone cost, everything else up there can be done for free. Same thing with the iMovie and Canva, those are both free resources. But this is kind of our platform that we use. And one thing you might notice when you click or went to that link that's on this at the very top, it probably asked you to make a copy. And so that means that that is a resource for you to use. This is the slide deck minus, there's a few things that didn't include in there. So obviously the two girls talking back and forth, I didn't use that when we introduced it to students, but we gave them this slide deck and this is what they used to build their podcast. They referenced this, they used this as they went through. So I'm just gonna give you kind of an outline of the process up until kind of the creation part of it. I'll have you guys go through a little bit of the creation part and then we'll show you some examples and then what were some of the ahas that I walked away with at the very end. But to front load them, I wanted them to see what were some podcast examples. So I showed them a couple of examples of adults doing podcasts. So the EdTech Takeout is by the Grant Wood AEA education team from Cedar Rapids area. And then the Listen Learn Lead podcast is a podcast that a colleague of mine were attempting to do. And so those were some adults. So we wanted to show them like what were the themes that emerged from those two. And then we showed them, here's some fifth grade examples, because I had no examples to show them. So I looked online to try to find some fifth grade examples. So those were some samples that I showed them that they could listen to. And one of the things that they noticed is that most of them had some kind of a catchy jingle start. Most of them identified what episode they're on. Most of them identified what they're going to be talking about, and then they jumped right into the episode. So they were able to see this as kind of a role model or kind of an exemplar piece that they could then model theirs after. So this piece within your slide deck, I'm going to have you take a few seconds. If you had to, on this slide where there's a green star, if you had to brainstorm an idea of what you would talk about. So I'll take maybe 30 seconds to a minute for you to think about in your own, if we were going to make your very own podcast today. And this is what I had students do. I said, I don't care what it is. It can be stuff you go home and do after school. It can be stuff that you do on a computer at home. It can be what you do outside at home with friends. It can be what you do on your phone when you're talking to friends. Like, what are the things that you're most excited about or most passionate about? And type those ideas. And then at that point, we'll explore. So I'll give you about 30 to a minute. And so on yours, you should just be able to click on any of those where it says type idea and see if you can generate at least 3 to 5 ideas really quick. If you don't have the slide deck open, just think in your head for a little bit what would be something that you could list as interest for you. So go ahead and try to fill that in.
I think you guys do it. Kids do that to me all the time. And I'm like, I go, and I'm like, I think it's a user issue. Pretty sure.
So as you start to fill out some of those or think about what you might have written in there, what are some of the things that some of you shared, if you're okay with sharing something out? What's something you can type in?
This is my brainstorm because I have a new production lab that I put in place at the high school, and I would like the students to, it would be called a podcast because we're the Panthers, Monticello Panthers. Talk about what's been going on in school during the week, because if you don't go to the volleyball game, you don't know if the girls won. If you don't go to the cross country meet, you don't know who came in what place. And so that would just be a way for the students who don't go to those activities or whatever else is going on around school to catch up on what's happening in the school.
Yeah. So as you were starting, like if you had students brainstorm this and they were trying to figure out topics of interest, so it might be like this one could be volleyball, basketball, football, extracurriculars in regards to maybe there's a chess club after school, there's a coding club after school, but with all of these topics, what we try to get students to do is to list off what are those things that they're interested in. So I might have some students that say that at home they go to their neighbor's house and they play catch with a baseball. And they also might say like, after school, they also go to a friend's house and shoot hoops. Or some of them might say, you know, I go home and I listen to music all the time. So based on what they came up with those ideas, and here's what some of them ended up typing as what they're really intrigued by as they started to do some of the ideas around that light bulb. And then what happened then is they jumped into, after they identified things, we said, what's the theme that kind of emerged? So this whole beginning process was trying to get them to shape what do they really want to talk about. Because I could have said, hey, go ahead and go talk about whatever you want, and it would have been all over the place. But we're trying to get them to see, like, you need to have a focus goal of what you're trying to accomplish with the podcast. So those that talked about sports, they're going to talk all about sports. So if they listed around their light bulb a lot of things that emerged as sports, that would be theirs. There's a lot of kids that had a lot of things about video games. So their theme would have been video games. So they know, like, based on my light bulb ideas, I have a whole bunch of things that center around video games. So my podcast in some way, shape, or form is going to be about video games. So the next part of this is we had them take, what are you going to actually do with your podcast? Are you wanting to inspire people? Are you wanting them to, like, laugh at what you're going to say during this part? Are you trying to give them tips and tricks? And so based on this, those students then got to choose, what is my goal behind my podcast that I built? Is it that I really am trying to just get people to believe me? Because I had some students that had really strong opinions about things, and they were trying to persuade people to believe what they believe. So based on that, they had to pick the purpose. So we've identified what's your theme. So sports, what's the purpose? I want to give reviews. Perfect. So then based on this, that led to, what is the title? So we gave them this kind of little formula that said, take your theme, what's your purpose, what are your topics, and then that's going to be kind of your brand. So we're trying to get them to wrap their head around, this is going to be your brand. And to give you kind of some perspective on this, this was not a long, drawn-out process. This took place over a couple of days with maybe like a 20 to 30-minute block of time on this. And once we did this and laid the foundation, the rest was, we never really needed to come back and visit this stuff. It was just getting them to understand, like, how do I decide and wrap my head around what I'm going to talk about? So, same thing here was their podcasting names. So based on what they listed on their previous light bulb, they had to make up what would they have as a title. And so it was funny to see some of them wrote really, really long titles of what they might want theirs to be. My best friend show about what we think is the latest hit trend in music. Like, so what is maybe the 3 to 5 words that they could use to describe their podcast? And they had to keep some perspective on, my title should capture what my podcast audience is expecting to hear from me. So what we came up with, sorry, I jumped ahead, but they had to actually fill us out to get some perspective on what does the end user want to hear from them. So rather than just having to be all about what they thought, we wanted them to get some feedback, whether it was asking adults in the building, whether it was asking their classmates, going down the hall to other teachers. We wanted them to kind of go through, not the entire design thinking process, but we really wanted them to see, how can I empathize with the end user? Because sometimes what we think is going to be super awesome, the people that are going to actually be kind of the listeners think it's awful. So how can we make sure that we're building a brand or a product that others would continue to want to listen to? So based on that, I'll come back to that part here. Oh, did I not have? We'll come back to, I thought I had some examples of what they came up with for podcasting names. You'll see them in their titles, or in their logos here in a second. So the slogans is when we jumped into, we showed them, okay, how do you design a logo? So this was my cheesy example I gave them. I just took a Bitmoji and said, hey, mine's going to be about Fat Food Podcast. So that was my title, 3 words. It captures what I'm trying to talk about. So I'm going to talk all about food. It's going to be fabulous food in my opinion. So I'm basically giving reviews and my opinions over food. I'm trying to convince you that this food's the best. So we showed them that this logo captured that. And we had them, with their title, they had to list things out. And we had them also try to empathize a little bit more with this article. And this article itself, let's see if it loads here, gave them some insight into, there we go, what colors meant. So as they designed the logo, they got to see what other logos out there are red and what kind of emotions does red actually evoke in someone. So you can see some of these pieces that they tried to get at. They didn't spend a ton of time on this, but what I wanted them to see is that there is a purpose behind the colors that show up in logos, and to consider that as they design their logo. So with that, they had that article and they went in and looked through what their logo might look like. They also brainstormed what could some pictures or icons be that I want to incorporate into that. A majority of them used Canva, whereas a few of them did use, let me jump ahead to Google Drawing. And this is all I showed them. I recorded these little screen grabs. And so all I showed them is I was like, all right, you're going to go into Canva on the left-hand side, and you'll click logo. And once you click logo, you'll be able to jump in and start designing a logo. So once you've clicked on logo, then at this point you can go find images. And so this is where they were finding their free images to throw in. And then after they added in their images, for this one they threw in pizza. I showed them, here's how you add a border. So go to the elements, find borders, go ahead and add the shape of a square around it. You can customize the color, but we showed them how you can just lay that over the top of their actual image. And then we also showed them at the very end, okay, you have your shape, you have your image, you have your border, now add your title. And at that point, they were able to see it. Within a few minutes, go ahead and design your logo. So again, we didn't spend a ton of time designing the logo. There's a really quick process for them to go through within Canva and build their logo. Google Drawing was pretty much the same concept, so we shared this with them as well. We showed them, hey, you already have a G Suite account, so go in, you can search within Google to find an image, and we used the pizza example just to mirror what Canva did. After they inserted the picture, we talked about adding a border, but it was a little bit different. So in this process, they had to add the shape, but the one extra step is they have to make it transparent. Because you put it over the top, and if you don't make it transparent, it won't show up. And we also showed them how to change the line thickness to make the border more visible. And at that point, we let them go ahead and add text over the top of their logo. And that was where they could then change the size and customize the font a little bit more, change the color. So we talked a little bit about the contrast, like how do you make it so that your logos end up being visible with the text on top of them to make sure that you are making the end user have the best experience with your logo. And so we also gave them some resources of what they could use to access some free resources in designing their logo. So we talked a little bit about digital citizenship here in regards to how do we actually use those visual elements that we have permission to use as opposed to just going to Google, searching for what we want, pulling those images in when we don't have permission. So here's some of their creations. And that was done with like little to no direction from me other than here's Canva, here's Google Drawings, here's how they work. So you can see some of them were very simple, like the one with the brain being my advice. He found a picture of a brain. This is a boy, and he pretty much interviewed the same kid all the time, and it's those two hashing out back and forth all the time. What's the latest fashion trends? What's the latest trends in school, like bottle flipping or dabbing and all that, like their opinions about things. So it's really funny listening to those two boys hash it out about what they thought was going on in their advice about things. The sports with soap, where it was about sports. She was big into we did this during March Madness. She literally, after every March Madness night, she recorded an episode where she gave a review of what were the results from the last night's games. And that's where it started. And then it moved into where she played like a club softball. She started interviewing her softball team about the sports team, their performance, like what their season looked like. So you can see a lot of them started to tap into their own passions and use those design tools in a way that we might not have used in the past. So the slogans, this is where I was trying to get them to see what other brands try to accomplish. And so this is another site that I included with them, and just a warning through my failures with this is, you can come down here, let's say I was doing food review. It'll generate a bunch. The one thing with this, which I didn't figure out until we did it, I don't know if I can find any. Sometimes there's not the most appropriate language on this. So if you do use this, I'll forewarn you. I don't see it, unless I'm overlooking it. But that was an easy way for them to brainstorm of what might be some potential slogans that they could include in their creation of their podcast. And then we kind of tapped into what we had done earlier is to get some feedback from their peers and explore what that slogan could look like. And here's what a bunch of them came up with for their slogans. So the loading content was a kid that was going to talk all about video games. Talking in 6th year, the kid was really passionate about cars. His dad fixed up cars. Him and his dad worked on cars together, so he talked a lot about cars. Competition stands down, all about video games. That kid wanted to talk all about video games. Little Notes all for music, or Little Notes for all music. She was big into giving music reviews of things. So you can see on this journey through things, we started off like, what is the podcast? So we explained that to them. Then we showed them like, how do you decide on a title? How are you going to figure out what you're going to talk about? What's the purpose of your podcast? And then ultimately, after you figure out your purpose, then how do you actually brand it with your logo and then also your slogan? Which led to this piece of actually creating it. So this is the part I'm going to have you dive into a little bit. So if you haven't yet, I'll have you open up Weave Video. Is there anybody that's familiar with Weave Video or play with Weave Video a little bit? Okay. So I'll have you jump into Weave Video just so you can see the experience that we did. And then I'll log into the free version that we have, or that I have. So you can see the free version. The premium version just has a few more features. The free version will still let you accomplish what you want. All right, so if you want to go ahead and create a new Weave Video, see how the internet cooperates.
So we have to create an account.
If you haven't yet, you can just, if you use your Google account,
Okay.
yeah, you can just sign up with a Google account if you haven't.
Oh, right there.
Other one coming. So as you get into that Weave Video setup or that platform, I'm going to show you really quick of what, if I was to mirror the same thing we did earlier. So I just searched pizza, and so if I was dropping in that image, and then the students wanted to incorporate a shape over it, or at least add their border to make it transparent. So what they did is change the line thickness around that. So now they have the border around my pizza, and then at this point is where they were able to add their actual title of their podcast. And then we'll go ahead and make it so you can see it a little better. All right, so this was my logo that I created. And the reason I wanted to show you this really quick is in order to do the Weave Video piece, they had to have their image. So we just had them all download that image as a JPEG. So I'll just download that quick so that we have it. So if you're in Weave Video, where we lived within Weave Video was the little folder icon. And the folder icon is where they added their items. So they needed to add that logo into their folder so that they had access to it in the future. So the nice thing is once they add it at one time, they're good to go from then on. So if I was to click the little green cloud, I'm going to browse to select, and then as you would before, just grab the image. So now that's adding my image. So what I'll have you do, if you don't have an image in your Weave Video, you don't need to necessarily create a logo. You can just simply go, just for the sake of this, if you went to, oh, Pizza Hut, that works. if you went to Google and just found an image for this point, or if you just already have an image on your computer, go ahead and throw any kind of an image you want so that you have it within your media. So I'll give you a little bit to grab an image.
Oh, good. I usually do stuff in myself.
All right, so what we ended up doing is once they had their logo in, all they did is drug their image down to video 1. So if you have an image, go ahead and add it to video 1. And this image is just basically going to be your placeholder for their podcast. So right now, if I hit play, this is all that they get. Nothing too exciting. I got an image that shows up for 5 seconds. Now, what you notice is on my preview over here, the preview of my image is pretty massive. It's not really showing to scale what I really want. So what you can then do, and the kids figured this out. I didn't really know much about WeVideo. They figured out that if you just double click on the actual image, it'll give you a lot of options to edit the image, as well as it makes it so that you can drag that image around. And so a lot of them figured out what they would just do is grab those little corner handles and rescale it so that it would fit on the visible part of the screen. So again, that was just double clicking it, and then once they double click it, it lets them move the image around to where it fits on the screen. But the other thing that we wanted them is we wanted them to, much like any other episode of a podcast, we wanted them to add the actual episode number. So for that, what we wanted them to do is up on the top where I have the letter A, we're probably going to get this for the motion titles, but with the starter, and this is if you're using the free one. If you have a premium version, you can have lots of resources, but I found a lot of kids use just the basic subtitle. All this, that's dark. But all I'm going to do is drag that to video 2. And so right now, if you notice, my logo shows up and it says sample subtitles to your video. And that's where I wanted them to put their episode number. So if you think back to the image, I could edit the image by double clicking. Same thing held true with their basic subtitle. If you double click it, you're able to customize the episode, customize the font, as well as change the size of the font as well. You're probably going to notice, as you're playing around, my episode number is not very visible as I go through. So if I hit play on this, my episode, oops, I didn't start over. My episode's kind of hidden. So they quickly figured out if you double clicked on your image and made it smaller, they were able to figure out, well, as long as I have those two separated, I can move my episode number around and my image so that if I have it set up, you can see both at the same time. Any questions about that so far? Does that make sense? About adding in those things? So I wanted them to incorporate some kind of a jingle, and most of them, even though I gave them the option to design their own using some resources, more often than not, they all went straight to this music note at the top and they had some to choose from. And so what a lot of them did is just pick the first one and put it down here where it says audio. Sorry about that. So now, so one of the things we had them do is we said 10 seconds maximum for your introduction in regards to like your catchy little jingle. We don't want it to be longer than 10 seconds so that you don't have a lot of people that are getting really annoyed by your catchy jingle. So what we had them all practice doing is just dragging out their pictures, and they figured out that if you just go to the end and put the mouse there, it'll give you 2 directional arrows. At that point, you click and hold, it lets you drag. And so we got it as close to 10 seconds as possible so they can kind of see. So with this, what we wanted them to do is to get rid of the rest of the music. And so as long as they had clicked on the audio track and it was highlighted, and that playhead at the very top was at the end of where that 10-second mark was at, they could click the scissors and it would actually cut that piece that they didn't need. They could then delete it. So right now, my super sweet podcast, 10 seconds long, it'll go through and play that. But
Where did you get the music again?
the music note at the very top
Oh, okay.
has some preloaded music that you can use. So I had some students, because they noticed that it sounded pretty bad if it started right away, so they wanted to figure out how can I get it to fade in, and then how can I get it to fade out before that person starts talking. Again, I didn't figure this out. A student figured it out and then shared it with the class that they figured out if you just click on the audio track, you get this blue line at the top, and you have these little white bubbles at the very end. And so they figured out if you drag that down, but then come back somewhere else on the line and click and hold, you can drag it back up. So then you can quickly customize like how quick of a fade out do I want, or how slow of a fade out do I want. Do I want it to fade all the way to the bottom? Like I don't have to fade all the way to 0 volume, but I can if I want. And they did the same thing at the very beginning then. So they played around until they kind of got where they wanted, so that as they tested it then, so they started to refine it to where it sounded a lot more professionally done at that point. Most of them would reopen the same project every time. So right now, they pretty much have the introduction every single time. The only thing that they have to change is when they get to episode 2, double click on their subtitle, change the 01 to 02, and they're ready to start recording for their second episode. So after they built the initial kind of foundation of this, they didn't have to do much at all. So now that they're ready to record the audio, as long as they put this little playhead at the very end, they were ready to rock and roll with actually recording audio. And what they did then is, if you remember, the folder is where we live most. There is this microphone icon that lets them then record right there. So it'll count down. Welcome. Not welcome. Let me start over. Welcome to episode 2 of the Fast Food Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about our favorite fast food restaurants and what we think might be the most popular one. And so they can add in, once they're satisfied with it, they click the check mark, it automatically inserts the audio. And so what a lot of them figured out is if they just actually click on that audio they just recorded down here, and they click on it and drag it up, it now puts it on the same one. So now, if they were to play this, welcome to episode, but they notice the same thing, like, that doesn't sound as good because we faded out and now all of a sudden it's just blaring with the person's audio. So then they made the connection right away, like, hey, could we fade that stuff in and out too? And then they did, so they moved this down a little bit and had it fade in. But what they noticed here is, welcome to episode 2. They still have that dead space. So then they were like, well, we want them to be kind of overlapped. And they realized that they had to drop that back down to a second track to where then they could kind of move it so that they overlapped a little bit, if that makes sense. So now what I've done is I kind of overlap those two pieces so that when it plays,
Welcome to episode 2 of the Fast Food Podcast. Today
so notice those little subtle changes made it sound much more refined and polished by just changing the fade in, fade out, and then moving our tracks around a little bit. So then at that point, if they were ready, a lot of them figured out that you can copy. So all I did is I clicked on my introduction because I want that to be my outro. So all I did is Control C, and then I'm going to move my playhead to the end, and then do Control V. And so now, at the end of what I talked
food
about,
restaurants and what we think might be the most popular one.
so obviously you have more of like an actual session or like podcast episode in between, but in a nutshell, like that was the front loading of it, of the intro jam, added in the logo and the episode number. But the one thing you notice is if I get this as the actual podcast, nothing shows up, it's only playing the audio. So what we told them to all do is to, at the very end, drag out their episode number and their logo so that the entire podcast itself is going to have their logo displayed and also have their episode number displayed. Does that make sense for but that's all it was for us to create the podcast. We wanted it to be super simple in a way that after that initial setup, the next time they got to this, really all they needed to do was to delete the middle part of this and then customize the episode number, and then they're ready to rock and roll again. So really it wasn't a super labor intensive piece, it was really focused on just designing the audio piece of it. And so that's where the next kind of phase of this, and so this is the stuff that I basically just walked you through. We gave them kind of the initial first episode, we had them fill out this March Madness bracket so that they could have a better understanding of what are some of the thoughts rambling around in my head, how do I narrow it down to just one? So they filled this out so they could get a better idea of where do I even start. So they started with their kind of winning idea that they thought was going to be the best way to launch their podcast, and then they had these other ideas that were still on their bracket that they could come back to. This was our very basic shell that they could use to organize their thoughts. And again, I said this is the slide deck that they had, so a lot of them just started typing directly within the slide deck about what they're going to be discussing. So we always said the intro should have your logo displayed, it should have the episode number, your intro music, the overview, what are they going to tell about in this episode, like I shared Fast Food Podcast, where we're sharing about restaurants today, which one we think is the best. Then the script would be kind of just a bulleted list of what are some of the questions that they might ask, or basically what are those maybe top 3 or 5 things that they really want to discuss. The outro was really just thanking the listeners and then giving a brief maybe snippet of what the next episode is going to be about. And that allowed them to help with framing their conversations. So this is where the final production piece really got us up and going. So what we used, let me jump ahead and we'll come back to some student examples. We used Flipgrid because it was, at the time it was paid, but it had all the features that we wanted. So this is what the actual grid looked like. So we used one grid, and so Flipgrid, if you're unfamiliar with Flipgrid, their terminology that they use is, think of the grid as like one Google Classroom, if you're familiar with Google Classroom. And then all of these down here are the actual, they're called topics on Flipgrid, but those topics, what we used them for on this was to be each student's actual podcast. So you can see here, based on some of these that are starting to show up, I have over here, this is one from just a PD a while ago, but the rest, this is one of the kids' games about tips to gaming that they wanted to use. So you can then see really quick that I have how many episodes have been recorded as a quick snapshot. You can see the title. Here's where their actual slogan came in, and then the creator was listed too. And so we use this because we wanted all of it to be in a central space. I didn't want to go to the route of having to publish these to iTunes and then having to have an actual podcasting app that you could collect all those podcasts. We wanted them to be in a central location that you have one link and that's going to get you everything. So if I have that one link, what it lets me do then is, if I was to click on this Gaming Wave, oops, it will show all of the episodes that he's recorded. And so some of the things you might see on, so some of the things you see here, episode 3, episode 3. He changed these pieces, but forgot to change some of the other components. So there's just little learning curves that we found out along the way of what to change. You see some of the other ones, he forgot to stretch out the logo the entire time, so the logo didn't display the entire time. So if we were to, so he got to the point where he just added in his actual slogan, so have a phenomenal gaming experience, and then he also added the episode number.
Hi, I'm Carson, and this is episode 1 of my Gaming Wave podcast. Today we are going to be talking with Luke about our top 3 favorite games. Right, Luke?
Okay. So you can also see I have it set to moderated, so that even if they uploaded it, I had to approve it. And the reason is that we shared this out with a lot of people. And so technically you have access to this link, so all of you can click and post as much as you want to theirs. And I didn't want random people posting to theirs, so I just set it to moderated so that I had to approve theirs on my end to make sure that those people that had access to it, we weren't publishing things that they shouldn't be. So this gave them access to all of those podcasts made by all the students. Some recorded a lot more episodes than others. Our goal kind of after we got going with this was maybe an episode a week. And that was kind of up to them on their terms of, if we're trying to think through a logical plan, maybe try to script it out on Monday and Tuesday, maybe record on Wednesday, maybe Thursday record, do some editing on Thursday, trying to publish it on Friday. Some kids literally got it done in one day. Some kids, it took some reminders. Other kids had 3 or 4 episodes done in a week because they were having a good time with it. So, with that, in publishing, to me and my advice, here's just a sample of what they decided to talk about. And I'll point out some of the errors that we discovered through the process.
Welcome to me and my advice. This is episode 1. We'll be talking about Sterling Warren's favorite trends in the last 5 years.
So my favorite trends, or my least favorite trends, would probably be, I do not like the water bottle flipping because it got old really, really fast. Same with dabbing, I did not like that. But I loved slime. That was a big thing this year.
Why didn't you like water bottle flipping or dabbing?
Because it got, people still do it today.
So one of the things you'll hear, and it's not awful on this one, but a lot of other ones that you can tell a lot more, is the microphones they used, they wanted to hold, and when they would pass them off, just a tiny little touch to the microphone sounded like somebody hit a hammer on the microphone. Some of them didn't realize that even if I set the microphone in between 2 people, but the microphone was closer to me, the audio that whoever's closest to is going to be way louder than the person that's farther away. Obviously, if we were way more knowledgeable on the post-production of actually going back in and changing the audio levels, I had no idea really how to do that, and I didn't want to spend time with that, so we just talked about, okay, listening to this, reflecting on your audio quality, what are some things you want to be mindful of on your next episode? So they went back and forth. Theirs was, again, you see introduction, podcast, or intro music, episode number, they have the interview. The other example of Sophie and her sports,
Welcome to episode 1 of Sports with Soap. Today I'm going to be talking about the Big Ten tournament. So the final winner of the Big Ten tournament was Michigan. They were the number 5.
so you see with hers, she recorded lots. And this was, I can't remember the exact, I don't know if it's showing me on here. Yeah, so March 8th was the first episode she recorded. So we didn't actually start this until really late in the school year. And so over the course of really March and April, because by the time we got to May, we kind of backed off of this just with end of year assessment stuff that we had to do. She was knocking them out of the park with the amount that she was recording, which is awesome to see that she was super excited about. So all that, within here, there's tips and tricks that are here, but the part that I wanted to highlight really quick before we, was, what's the point? Let me figure out where it's at.
So who can see that? Is that a public, did you make it public that?
I did. So you can set within Flipgrid, you can have some different settings in regards to how you set up who can have access to it. So they changed that now to where it can be like school domain, where you whitelist domains. So you would list your school's kind of the end part of your email address so that only people that have that email address can access it. The problem is then that students can access it, but parents that don't have a district email can't access it. You can set it up as like a student list with ID numbers so that they don't have to use an email to sign in, or you can do a public grid, which is what I did with this. They are in the works of eventually, I think later this month yet, they'll be rolling out to where you have the option to do, you'll be able to kind of grant permission to community members. So they're going to make it a little bit more seamless to how you can grant access to a wider audience outside of your classroom, but it's still kind of restricted on broader things. Does that make sense? Yeah. So part of this, like these moments that I walked away with from this project that I never would have thought actually came about. So these two you already heard. Mac and Sterling were the ones doing Me and My Advice. Mac was the creator of Me and My Advice. Sophie and Kaysen, you heard Sophie was going to interview Kaysen about the Big Ten tournament. I took these four to the Iowa 1-for-1 conference in the spring, and they actually presented. So they're the ones that had to lead the session, or lead the session, I should say. So here's what they actually did during that time. So one of the things that was fun from this is that I obviously couldn't bring my whole class over here to the conference for them to present, but they knew that they were the four that were representing not only their class, but our school and our entire district, showing that their voices were truly what was the root of this project, that they actually had something to share that was worth listening to. Based on that experience, while we were actually here, Matt Miller from Just That Textbook reached out and said, hey, can we record a podcast episode of how to actually do it? And what was funny is I said, well, I don't really want to talk because it's not me that's doing it, it's the kids that are creating it. So the kids, while we're actually here at the Iowa 1-to-1 conference, Matt got on Anchor app and we actually recorded an episode back and forth. He was over in Indiana recording the time. What was funny is like these kids didn't realize the impact that this would have on the end product of things, to see how big, like how important their voices can actually be. So he shared it out and they were really amazed that somebody really wanted to listen to them. And this was, we had posted a video because I think it was Matt Miller had shared out. So this is our original video. Let me.
4, sharing, thanks.
So we did that to record, like we recorded it as a thank you to Matt Miller to say like thanks for sharing our story basically. And we posted that as a thank you, and then thank you. So it was really kind of a fun takeaway from that as I showed him. I was like, so you actually had the director of We Video for Schools take time out of his day with his team to actually record a response to you. So now they're seeing the power that their voices have, plus the power of social media, plus that they actually have something worth sharing that other people are really inspired by. So now what started out as like, how can we make writing a little bit more exciting, turned into let's share your voice a little bit, to now let's use the power of technology to amplify your voice out beyond just the four walls of our classroom, to where now, not only is Matt Miller wanting to record a podcast episode on this whole process, but the director of We Video at School says, hey, here's the time of day, let's actually record a video just for you guys to show our thanks for you. So it's funny how these things continue to just kind of spiral throughout this whole entire process. So Dina from Kansas actually replied to one of my students and actually was asking her. So the girl recorded an episode about Snapchat, or recorded about an update to Snapchat. And so Dina was replying saying, yeah, I like Snapchat, but I really don't understand all the filters. Can you explain more? So based on what my student was sharing her expertise on Snapchat, this lady from Kansas tapped into her expertise. Same thing with Derek from Tennessee. He actually has his own podcast. He listened to one of the boys' podcasts in our classroom and was really intrigued by how well it sounded and was asking for some tips and pointers. So it was funny to see how, like, in a short amount of time, these educators across the world, or I should say across the United States, were really kind of driven by what these students had to share. And so I already kind of shared some of those examples. So, and then I know we're kind of at the end of time of what it says on the sign. So I'll leave you with this as we kind of walk away.
Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Sports with So. Today I'm not going to do anything. I know this sounds weird, but that's because this is the last episode of Sports with So. So the school year is coming to an end. The last day of school is already over. It is the last day of school today, but it's already done. So I decided I'd make a short video of how much I've enjoyed podcasting. Of course, one of the obvious things I loved about podcasting was we could interview anybody we wanted about anything we wanted. Well, it was basically a topic of our podcast, but that was another cool thing. We could do any topic we wanted. Yeah, it was really fun. You know, such a good experience. Thank you to my teacher, Mr. Fenstermaker, for letting us do it. It was so much fun. I know that was really short, but that's all I needed to say. Hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. If you want to see more of me doing podcasts, I have a link below of another podcast that I do, and it's just like a talk show, so it's about all the topics. I hope you guys enjoyed sports with So, because I enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Bye.
So I thought it was a humbling moment for me in regards to the last day of school, school's out, we're done. Like, I'm not going to be her teacher ever again. And she went home, she found it important for her to record an episode beyond the school day itself, beyond the school year itself, to say thanks to this whole entire process. So, like, from that, I was like, wow, that was kind of inspiring. So, you know, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to things today. I'm happy to stick around and answer any of the kind of finer detailed questions you might have, but I want to be respectful of your time at the end of the day of a long learning opportunity we've had here. So it's an easy process once you get it up and going. The kids, it gives you a lens into their lives that otherwise me giving them packets or giving them assignments here and there would probably not have exposed some of their inner passions that I don't get to see on a daily basis. So it really helped me develop the positive relationships I needed to eliminate some of the ongoing behavior issues that other teachers had at this same group. But by me having the opportunity to tap into their passions and get to know them at a personal level, it eliminated some of those. So it just reinforces how powerful their voices truly are and how can we actually leverage those voices. So as I said, I'll stick around. Feel free if you have questions to ask, but I appreciate you sticking around at the end of the day to hang out. So thanks.